household is that we speak in a lot of different accents, and that's like me and Paige's thing. We have a lot of British accents that we use with one another, and it was really cool. Came upon this little video clip about different accents and how to use them, so let's take a look at this little thing right here.
Hi, I'm Sammy Grant, and I'm a dialect coach. I'm legally blind, and one of the reasons I got into dialect coaching is because I love to hear people's voices and help people find the range of their voices. So to help you, I'm going to teach you a few quick tips on how to come up with different accents. So we got nuns in, and for nuns in, you want to send the sound really forwards in your mouth. So send vocal energy forward and drop your R sound. So instead of car, they say car. And then there's the Yorkshire accent, which sounds a bit like a combination of Irish and Cockney, and they have these really long, pure vowel sounds, so they say O and A in the Yorkshire accent. And then there's the Irish accent itself, and for that you definitely want to keep those R sounds kind of lean into them, and it's a bit of a tighter sound, and you want to really hit all of your consonant sounds, so they say later instead of later. And then there's the Scottish accent, which people always think sounds exactly like Irish, and it doesn't. It's really, really different. And for that, you want to feel like you're swallowing the sound in the back of your mouth, and then you want to roll those R's in the Scottish accent. And then we're going to go to America. We're going to go to Brooklyn, and for Brooklyn, you want to have a lot of lip rounding to make those O sounds they do, like get coffee, and talk, and small, and all, and then you want to have a lot of attitude, so that you got that Brooklyn attitude of don't get in my way. And then there's the Midwestern accent, which is my natural accent, which has a lot of flatness, so instead of mom, they say mom, or they say Sammy, which is the way I naturally say my name. And then there's, of course, the Southern accents, and this one that I'm doing right now, you keep your R sounds, and you might hear it in Kentucky, or Mississippi, or Tennessee, or, lots of places. And then you want to have some length to your vowels. So instead of saying can, they say can. And then there's the Southern accent that doesn't have R's, which is dying out these days. It's much more heard in the old generation, but for this, obviously, you drop the R sounds, and then you want to really play with your pitch range and go up in those pitches, so you have that sort of delicate sound. And then there is the French accent, and for the French accent, you want to have these really forward, droopy lips, so they kind of go these droopy lips that go like that, and then they have that R sound in the back of their mouth. So instead of tomorrow, they say tomorrow. Tomorrow is the French accent. And then there is German accent, which is very similar in many ways to the French accent, but it is very tight, very crisp, and has that sort of harsh sound, and you don't want to have any lip movement for it at all. And then there is a Russian accent, which is in the back of the mouth, and it has that sort of swallowed feeling again, and you want to have that h on your H's. Hello, how are you? Don't overdo it, don't go, how are you? You're going to pack up a furball, it's just hello. And then there's my favorite accent, which is the transatlantic accent, which we don't really hear anymore, but you'll hear if you watch Golden Age movies, because people like Katharine Hepburn were taught to speak it. And for that, you want to make sure that your sounds are really rounded, and that your R sounds are really light, and that you have these really dramatic pitch changes like they do in those movies. And those are some of my favorite accents. Good luck.
Okay, so my favorite one is, I think I like the Scottish, the Irish. They're always off their Lucky Charms kind of voice kind of thing. Yeah, because I am 64% Irish. So, but it's interesting, like even in English, you have like different variations of accents, of intonations, of even words like pop and soda, hot dog, hoagies, subs, things like that. So you have different cultural variations between, even in the English language. So where do we get those things? Even in English, you see that little division, but here in the United States, well, in the world today, we have over 7,000 languages. 7,000 of them. So it's interesting, where do we get those divisions idioms and those variations within language today. So what we're going to take a look at, Genesis chapter 11, is the Tower of Babel. We're going to look at aspects of the circumstances surrounding the account of the Tower of Babel. And these parallel some modern day circumstances. So Genesis chapter 11, let's get a little context for where we're at. Verses 1 through 9, we're going to read the entirety of the passage, and then we're going to get into the little meat of the text. Verse 1 says, "Now the whole world had one language, one common speech. As men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Then they said to each other, 'Come, let's make bricks, bake them thoroughly.' They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, and they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the earth.' But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. And the Lord said, 'If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. So come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other.' So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth and stopped building this city, and that is why it is called Babel, because where there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, whole world, and from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth." So let's take a couple of little things that happen in the text. First of all, there's one phrase that I'm going to pick out, and then what that talks about. So first of all, we see that there was one language all over the earth, and it was, we talk about mass communication. Now, you think about this, presents a big problem for the secularist when you talk about languages, because now you take, for example, a gorilla or a chimpanzee, and if you take it from its troop and then you plop it down anywhere that these species are found, and it will know how to communicate with another group of apes or chimpanzees. You could do this with donkeys, with crickets, goldfish. You'll get the same exact outcome. They automatically know how to communicate with each other. You could take one from China and bring it to the United States, and you'll be able to communicate. Two donkeys will be able to communicate with one another because they have that inherent ability. Now, apes around the world, they can understand each other. So why do intellectually superior humans have around 7,000 different languages? You take somebody from China, bring them over to the United States, they have no idea what's going on. This highlights an intriguing paradox at the heart of human communication. If language supposedly evolved to allow us to exchange information, how come most people cannot understand what most other people are saying? Language is so intricate, so complex. The mechanisms that the evolutionist proposes that language came about really falls short. The only way you can explain the differences in communication is through the biblical account right here. So you take, for example, the German language. There are 3 genders, there are 4 cases, and verbs are conjugated for person and for number. That's German. You take Latin, and it has even more complex and ordered grammar than that. And somehow you take these 2 languages and you bring it into English, because English comes from both Germanic language and from Latinized language. You bring it down into English, but English doesn't have gender conjugation. There are no cases. It becomes a less complex language. So how do you take something that is very complex, make it very simple? Because that flies in the face of evolutionary thinking. And in evolutionary thinking, you take something that's simple, make it more complex. But with language, it becomes very complex, becomes more simple. The evolutionists will say that language, it had to be some sort of evolutionary kind of thing, but you can't explain it away. It's so complex that there's only an intervening explanation for it by the hand of God. What we see happening in the text is that they came from the east. So, we have all of our modern day languages stemming from that. Some of these I know, some of them I don't understand. What is Bangawoyo? I don't know. Some of these, Ola, Aloha, things like that. Kodag, Merhaba. All of these are hellos all over the world. So it's there's a complexity to it and a lot of these are very unrelated. So it's like you have Indo-European languages, and then you have Chinese languages, which are, they're completely unrelated, and then you have like Basque that's thrown into there that's unrelated to both Indo-European and Chinese and those Asian languages, and so it's like, where does this all come from? Because they're not related that way. But here we have in the text, it says that they all came from the east. Okay, some translation says that they journeyed from the east, and the word that is used here, it could be translated, they came from the eastward. And this is really neat because, the first original language that was put down in written form is the Chinese language. Okay, and we've talked about this before, how in the Chinese language, you see the story of creation woven into it. You see the story of Noah and the flood. And it's also the Tower of Babel is mentioned in the writing of the Chinese language. Take, for example, what happens here. This is the word for migrate, okay, to move. But look at what happens here. You have a great walk that went west, okay? So you have the plain of Shinar, Tower of Babel, they're moving west, and then they stop. Okay, so the Tower of Babel is mentioned right there in the Chinese language. We're going to do two more examples in just a second, but the word migrate has a biblical theme woven right in there. So you guys recall when we talked about the great flood, of word for big boat is the number 8, okay, and ship put together. Okay, so number 8 refers to the number of people that came off of the ark. And so that in the Chinese language is you have the story of Noah and the great flood mentioned right there in their character for a big boat. It says that they came from the plain of Shinar, which was this Middle Eastern area. You have two rivers right here, the Euphrates and the Tigris. Now, these are not necessarily the Euphrates and the Tigris that are mentioned in the beginning of the narrative in Genesis chapter 1, but these people came to this area. It was very fertile, and so it probably reminded them of Eden. And so they said, okay, well, this is probably where Eden is. And so they named these two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. They went and established their building grounds right there in Babylon, right there, and that is where our narrative begins. So you have one language spoken for all the entirety of the earth. And then in verse 3 it says, they said to each other, come, we're going to make bricks, bake them, and they used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar, and they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so they would make a name for themselves so we won't be scattered all over the earth. So first, the second little phrase right there is make a name. And by this, they were expressing their pride in their human accomplishments and also disobedience. And recall that God told Noah when he stepped off the ark, I want you to go into all the world, multiply, and scatter all over the face of the earth. But here you have man coming together saying, we don't need to listen to God, we can do whatever we want. Let's just all get together and build this big tower so we don't be scattered. And so they were in direct disobedience of what God desired for them. They started building together what would be called a ziggurat, okay, a large tower. We don't know exactly what the Tower of Babel looks like, but we do understand the technology that may have been behind the Tower of Babel, and you see this scattered all over the earth. You see Egypt, you see Central America, you also see right here, this is Indonesia, and you see portions of this technology over in England and in Mexico. And so this technology of stepped pyramidal structures is used all throughout the world. So I would tend to believe that, yes, at one time everybody was established right there in the Middle East. God called everybody to be confused in languages, and they used this similar technology all throughout the world when they were scattered. It's interesting. Right here, the word for tower in Chinese is dust, okay, plus grass. So how do you make a brick? Dust, grass. You take the people, and they were all together with one mouth. The oldest language in written history is Chinese, and it contains right there within the word tower, the Tower of Babel. So interesting, right then and there. So the purpose statement for all of what they were doing was that we need to establish ourselves. We're going to make ourselves greater than God. We're going to build a tower that will reach up to the heavens. So you have all the people with one tongue working their way with this large tower to get up to be just like God. The purpose statement is the same as the devil's, as it was back in Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. It says, the devil said, you're going to be just like God. Even the man who founded Babylon, Nimrod, okay, we're going to skip ahead to this. Remember last week we talked about Nimrod. He was a great hunter, or a great man who stood in the face of the Lord. He was against the Lord. It's interesting, from this establishment of this culture, that several things started to progress. So Nimrod had a wife by the name of Semiramis, okay, and they would have a child by the name of Tammuz. And this child, Tammuz, would be the basis of all of their religious history. What happened here is that they established this religion, which we will call Neo-Babylonianism. And what has happened is that this would affect every other culture that would come around it. So it would be established right there in this, the plain of Shinar, in this Babylonian area. And it's interesting that even with their culture and with their religious studies, they would call themselves, the people of the sea, and the people that would lead their worship, they would wear these fish head hats, interestingly. And it's interesting that as a culture and time came along, that these crowns bore the name Keeper of the Bridge. It was also used by the Roman emperors, or Pontifex Maximus, and so even today we still have the fish hats that are used in the religious worship over there in Roman Catholicism. You take also an example for Semiramis. This it was as this Neo-Babylonianism was established in that area. They would be driven out by different cultures, and this would be spread all throughout different areas. So, for example, you have the goddess Diana of Ephesus. You have the Roman Catholic Mary, God incarnate Jesus, right there. Egyptian goddess Isis and son Horus. So Isis is not just a terrorist organization. It was also an Egyptian goddess. The Babylonian goddess, the Indian goddess Okiva, and the Indian goddess and infamous Swara. The worship of the Great Mother was very popular under the Roman Empire. Yet inscriptions prove that the mothers and the child, received divine honors, not only in Italy, especially in Rome, but also in the provinces, particularly in Africa, Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, and Bulgaria. So you have this worship of the goddess that was spread all throughout that area. You see the continuation of that. We still have a lot of influence from Neo-Babylonianism that is being spread amongst the popular religions of today, especially in Muslim and in a lot in the Roman Catholicism. We're going to skip over this. We'll come back to that one day, okay, for the sake of time. But I want us to take a note right here. It says that the Lord came down, saw what was happening, and what God recognized is that there was a rebellion going on. They were not heeding his instruction. And it says in verse 5, but the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that people were building, and the Lord said that if, as one people speaking the same language, they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, confuse their language so they will not understand each other. So, BJ, Paige, what is the biblical term to describe an Old Testament appearance of the Lord? A theophany. Very good. Nice job. All right. You can graduate now. Okay. A theophany. Old Testament appearance of the Lord. So what happens here is the Lord looks around, sees a rebellion happening, and then he says, let's go down. Notice this says, let us. That speaks of the triunity of God, the three persons of God the Father, God the Son, the Holy Spirit. He came down and recognized there's something wrong that's going on here. They're not heeding our instructions, so he caused them to be confused in their language. Now, this is something I noticed right here, is that anytime you see a great judgment happening to the earth, God visits right before it happens. Okay, so you take, for example, right here, at the ark, right before the floods started coming, who closes the door? God does. So before judgment happens, God visits. You take, for example, here and later in the book of Genesis, you have Abraham. You have Lot, and they're living in the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah. And before God rains judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah, notice what happens, is that he comes to visit Abraham. And he says, I'm going to bring judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. And there's a theophany right there. Theophany at the ark, a theophany right there with Abraham. Right before judgment happens at the Tower of Babel, God says, let's go down and visit these people. Notice what happens in the last days. Before God rains judgment on this earth in the tribulation, what happens is that, behold, I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last judgment. And then those who are dead and buried, they shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up in the air with the Lord, and so we shall be with the Lord forever. So before judgment happens on this earth, notice what happens. The Lord visits. And God takes his church with him at the rapture. Before judgment happens, the Lord visits. So isn't that a great reassurance for us? Before God recreates this earth, before he scours it, what is he going to do? He's going to visit us. It can happen right now with all of us. That he can bring about a revival within the hearts of his people. Yeah, one day he'll come in the clouds and come take us to be with him, and so we shall be with the Lord forever. But he can rule and reign right now within our hearts, within our lives, within our family. It's interesting, last little Chinese tidbit right here. The word for confusion is the word tongue and mystery. So they didn't understand the words that were being said. From this point on, you will see the scattering of peoples into different areas, into different nations, into different tongues, and that's where we get our modern day languages, and over 7,000 of them. Here's the thing, here's the lesson I learned from all this that human kingdoms are made to fall. Human kingdoms are made to fall. But there's one kingdom that will stand forever. So my question to you and my question to myself is, whose kingdom are you building? Which kingdom do we spend the majority of our lives building is maybe the better question. I have found many points in my life, especially right there at the tail end of our ministry in Plevna, I was just kind of burnt out. I had just gone through a bout of shingles and just stressed out all the time. And Lord, I don't even have a home here, a house here on this earth for my family. I have nothing for them. I was just frustrated. And I remember one day it was just like the Lord was saying, Bruce, this kingdom you're trying to build for yourself here on this earth, it's not going to last. Everything that you're working for in this world and trying to get comfortable here in this world, it won't last. So Bruce, what I want from you is give me your whole heart. Give me your whole life, your thoughts. I want everything that you are. And then once you give me all that, then you're going to see that peace that you truly desire in your heart and your life. It was Martin Luther who once said, I've held many things in my hands and I've lost them all. And whatever I have placed in God's hands, that I still possess. When you're working for God's kingdom, when you're giving your heart, your mind, your soul, everything that you are for Him and for His kingdom, then I'll tell you what, there's nothing like that provision that He provides to you and gives to you. There's a peace and a rest that you cannot find in any other thing in this world. When you give it all to Him, all those things you will still possess. He who would gain this life must give it up. Is what Jesus says. So let's pray. Lord, I pray that we will be working for a kingdom that has no end. And when we awake in the morning, that we would not be thinking, I gotta go to work, gotta do this, gotta go to school, all that. Those are important things, but God, I pray that we will approach our lives and in the thinking that, Lord, I'm going to work and I'm building a kingdom for you. It's my desire to go to school and so that I can live a life that is I can enhance it, so for the pleasure of growing your kingdom, God. May that always be our final desire here on this earth, that no matter what happens in this earth, that we would seek first your kingdom, your righteousness, and then by inference, what you say in your word is that all these other things shall be added unto us as well. Lord, thank you. I pray, Lord, that we would be busy about establishing what you want in and through our lives. All of this, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to invite the worship team to come at this time, and while they're playing,